On a freezing night, a struggling single dad gives his only blanket to a shivering stranger on a park bench, never imagining she owns the building he secretly lives in. Owen Harlan, a 34-year-old single father with rugged hands and weary eyes, tugged his threadbare jacket tighter around his lean frame. His son Milo, just 6 years old with curly brown hair and a cough he couldn't shake, leaned against him beneath the tattered quilt that had seen better years. They slept in a corner of an abandoned industrial warehouse on the edge of Dunsloe, a forgotten coastal town where jobs were scarce and warmth even scarcer. That night, frost hung in the air like glass. Owen had bundled Milo as best he could and ventured into the nearby park, hoping to scavenge some firewood. That's when he saw her, sitting alone on a bench, her arms wrapped around herself. Pale skin blushed red from the biting wind. She looked around 30, with long dark hair tangled in the breeze, wearing nothing but a thin office blazer and heels. Her lips trembled and her eyes were dull with exhaustion. Owen's instincts kicked in. Without a word, he took off his coat and placed it around her shoulders. Then he removed the only blanket he had brought for Milo. "You'll freeze like that," he said gently, voice husky. "Take this." She looked up, startled, but couldn't speak. She simply nodded, clutched the blanket, and let silent tears roll down her cheeks. As Owen walked away, he couldn't shake the image of her shivering hands. When he returned to the warehouse, Milo stirred. "Daddy, where's the blanket?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Owen smiled softly. "We'll make do, buddy." He curled his body protectively around Milo and shivered through the night. Meanwhile, the woman on the bench, whose name was Lila Renford, tried to stay awake. She was the 31-year-old CEO of a major real estate firm, but that night she felt more lost than ever. She'd stormed out of a board meeting overwhelmed, without her coat or phone. Her life had felt so empty, until a stranger gave her warmth. Sometime past midnight, Lila collapsed from the cold. A jogger found her unconscious at dawn and called an ambulance. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled Lila's nostrils as she opened her eyes. The blinding hospital lights flickered above her. A nurse hovered, clipboard in hand, looking relieved. "You're lucky," the nurse said softly. "Another hour out there and you might not have woken up." Lila blinked, struggling to recall. "The man, did he come with me?" The nurse frowned, puzzled. "Someone found you alone. But the paramedic said you were covered in a blanket and a coat. Whoever helped you saved your life." Lila closed her eyes again, the memory flashing back, the man's kind face, his warm voice, the softness of the blanket he had given without hesitation. She hadn't asked his name. She didn't even know how to find him. But something about the way he had looked at her, the silent strength in his actions, it haunted her. As she recovered over the next few days, Lila grew restless. She wasn't used to feeling powerless. Her firm, Renford Properties, was in the middle of a major urban redevelopment. Yet here she was, obsessed with a stranger who had nothing yet gave everything. He had saved her life. Now she needed to find him. Owen returned to the warehouse that morning exhausted, body aching from the night cold. Milo had slept fitfully, his little body shivering even in sleep. Owen held him close and whispered stories until morning came. By midday, Owen was out again, hustling for food, gathering scraps of wood for warmth. The warehouse was an empty shell with rusted beams and broken windows, but it was the only roof they had. A tarp over a corner had become their room. Owen had once been a carpenter. He had built homes for others until the crash took his job and a drunk driver took his wife. He had never recovered fully, but for Milo's sake he kept going. He never expected praise or help. The world had taught him not to. Still, he couldn't forget the woman on the bench. He hoped she was all right. He had no regrets giving her that blanket, even if it meant another cold night for him and his boy. What Owen didn't know was that Lila was already searching for him. Lila pulled every string she could to trace her mysterious savior. She had her assistant scour surveillance footage from the park, but the snowstorm had blurred the view. No one at nearby shelters recognized the description she gave: a man in his 30s, brown hair, kind eyes, with a young boy. Days turned into a week. The board at Renford Properties pushed her to focus on the redevelopment plans for a cluster of abandoned warehouses on the edge of town, one of which she hadn't visited yet. She drove there one rainy afternoon, curious. The buildings had sat untouched for years. The city wanted them revitalized into upscale apartments. Lila had initially agreed, but as she stepped into one of the warehouses, number 7, her breath caught. There, tucked behind a makeshift curtain of tarp, was a man reading to a child. He looked up, and she knew it was him. Owen froze when he saw her in the doorway. Lila was wearing a long beige coat, hair tied back, her face pale but alert. She stepped forward slowly. "It's you," he blinked. You made it. You gave me your coat and the blanket." Owen shifted uncomfortably. "Wasn't much. Anyone would have done it." Lila smiled faintly. "No, most wouldn't, especially not when they needed it for their son." Milo peeked out from behind Owen, curiosity bright in his eyes. Lila crouched down to meet Milo's gaze. "Hi, I'm Lila." Owen gently placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "This is Milo." She stood and looked around the warehouse. "This place isn't safe, you shouldn't be living here." "We don't have much of a choice," Owen replied quietly. Lila hesitated. She saw the carpenter's tools neatly stored, a small heater made from scavenged parts, a battered kettle on a portable stove. Despite the decay, Owen had created a home here, and something stirred in her: responsibility, gratitude, hope. "I want to help," she said finally. Owen didn't know whether to laugh or be offended. "Help how? You gonna buy me a house?" he said dryly. Lila didn't flinch. "I own this warehouse." He stared at her in disbelief. She continued, "My company's set to demolish these buildings next month. But I don't want to anymore. I want to do something else with it, something better." Owen raised an eyebrow. "I want to build a place for people like you, a shelter, a real community center." He glanced around. "This place, it's falling apart. I have the money, you have the hands. What if we work together?" Owen studied her. She wasn't joking. She wasn't even pitying him. She looked determined. He thought of Milo, of the nights spent praying for a miracle. And for the first time in years, something flickered in Owen's chest: possibility. The next day, Lila returned with papers, old architectural plans, permit documents, a renovation proposal. Owen brought out his toolbox. They sat on overturned crates, plotting out what the space could become. "A kitchen here," Owen said, pointing with a pencil. "And maybe bunks on the east side," Lila nodded. "And a learning room for kids, showers definitely." Milo watched wide-eyed from a corner. For the first time, his father wasn't just surviving, he was building again. Over the next few days they started cleaning. Owen cleared debris, Lila secured temporary lighting. She handled the paperwork, he handled the hammers. They made a strange team, him with calloused hands, her with a clipboard. But they clicked. Neighbors began noticing. A retired plumber volunteered. A college student offered to paint. Word spread. The warehouse that had once echoed with emptiness now pulsed with new energy. They called it the Haven. As renovations began in earnest, Owen found himself smiling more often, even laughing. A rare sound in his world. Lila was there every morning, boots on, sleeves rolled up, not afraid to get her hands dirty. She surprised him. He had assumed she was just another suit from the upper floor of life. But Lila worked with grit, a quiet intensity in her gaze. Still, Owen couldn't help but feel guarded. Trust didn't come easy. He remembered the night he gave her that blanket, how her lips trembled, how lost she looked. He hadn't asked who she was then. He'd only seen someone who needed help. Now she was helping him. But why? Late one afternoon, while pulling up old flooring in a side room, Lila sat beside him and shared what the others didn't know: her upbringing in foster homes, her struggle to prove herself in a male-dominated corporate world, her rise to CEO status at 28, and her loneliness once she got there. "I walked away that night because I didn't want to go back to the boardroom," she admitted. "And then you reminded me that people still care." Owen looked at her differently after that, not as a boss, but as someone who knew what it was to be cold and alone. The warehouse began to transform, slowly but surely. Owen fixed the plumbing, restructured the walls, and taught volunteers how to use tools safely. Lila managed city permits, negotiated donations from suppliers, and organized the schedule with military precision. Each day, the Haven became more than just shelter. It became a beacon. A mural of a sunrise was painted by a local artist on the eastern wall. Milo picked the colors. "It needs to feel like morning," he said, and everyone agreed. Owen saw in Lila a partner, not just in construction, but in purpose. She brought out a side of him he hadn't seen since before his wife died. With her, he didn't feel like a burden or a charity case. He felt capable, useful. And Lila, she began spending her evenings at the Haven even when there wasn't work to do. She played board games with Milo and brought home cooked meals, laughing when Owen teased her for burning the rice. Their bond deepened with each shared task, every late-night conversation about life, dreams, and second chances. One evening, Milo climbed into Lila's lap and asked, "Do you think we could live here forever?" She looked over at Owen, then back at the child. "I hope so," she whispered. Just when things seemed to be falling into place, an email arrived that changed everything. Lila's company board had found out about the Haven project. They weren't pleased. Investors were furious she had halted redevelopment plans. Her authority as CEO was being questioned. She sat with Owen that night in the half-renovated kitchen, her face tight with worry. "They want to force me out," she said. "I own majority shares, but they're using loopholes. Emergency meetings, votes, it's ugly." Owen looked at her, his jaw tight. "Then let it go." Lila's eyes widened. "You don't understand, this was everything. My whole life has been about that company," he nodded. "And now it isn't." Silence hung between them. Then she sighed. I'm just scared. What if I lose everything? You won't, Owen said firmly. You'll still have this, us. He meant it. He didn't say me and Milo, he said us. Lila looked at him, eyes softening. She realized in that moment that the Haven wasn't a detour in her life. It was her life now, and if the board couldn't see that, maybe it was time she walked away for good. The fallout came swiftly. Lila was officially voted out as CEO 2 weeks later. The board framed it as a strategic realignment, but she knew the truth. They didn't want a woman who put compassion over profit, reporters called. News articles swirled. Eris CEO ousted after homeless project controversy. She could have fought it, but she didn't. Instead, she showed up at the Haven the next day with donuts for the volunteers and a paint-splattered sweatshirt. Owen met her at the door. You okay? She gave him a tired smile. I'm free. The community rallied around her. More volunteers came. Donations increased. People who had once walked past the warehouse without a second glance were now dropping off food, clothes, and books. And Lila, for the first time in years, felt whole. With her corporate mask stripped away, she embraced who she truly was. A woman who cared, who loved, who built things not to impress but to uplift. Owen, watching her with Milo, reading stories, organizing classes, joking with volunteers, couldn't deny what was growing in his heart. He had been alone for so long he didn't recognize love at first, but now it was impossible to ignore. The Haven was officially open to the public 1 month later. The ceremony was small but emotional. Local families who had been struggling were given safe shelter, warm meals, and access to job resources. The once crumbling warehouse now held life, laughter, and hope within its walls. Owen stood with Milo at the entrance, his carpenter's hands freshly scrubbed, a tie crookedly looped around his neck. He had built the stairs, the bunk beds, the bookshelves. And now he watched as people found peace inside what he once considered ruins. Lila stood beside him in a casual blue dress, her long dark hair loose, her smile bright but humble. She wasn't the CEO of a corporation anymore. She was something greater, a pillar of change, a leader who stood with her community, not above it. When a young mother broke into tears upon receiving her room key, Owen reached for Lila's hand and squeezed it. She didn't pull away. After the ceremony, Milo tugged on her sleeve. Are you staying for dinner again? She smiled and knelt beside him. Only if I get to help make it, he nodded excitedly. You can help Daddy with the spaghetti, he makes it kind of gross, Owen chuckled. Thanks, partner. Lila laughed too and stayed. The nights at the Haven became filled with quiet moments of connection. Lila and Owen would often find themselves talking long after the others had gone to sleep. Sometimes it was about the future of the center. Other times it was about the pieces of themselves they had never shared with anyone else. Owen told her stories about Milo's birth, how he learned to braid his late wife's hair, how he lost everything but refused to let Milo lose him too. His voice always grew softer when he talked about his boy. Lila shared her own past, how she had never known her real parents, how she'd grown up believing that success meant safety, and how she'd chased that success until it no longer meant anything. You know what scares me most, she whispered one night, sitting with him on the roof under the stars. Not failing, but finally having something to lose. Owen looked at her. Maybe that's what makes it real. The air between them shifted. A long pause, inspoken understanding. They didn't kiss that night, but something deeper passed between them. A silent promise that neither of them was alone anymore. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. A pipe burst in the basement, flooding part of the storage room. Volunteers scrambled. Owen waded in with his tool belt, and Lila rolled up her sleeves without hesitation. Together they worked for hours, hauling boxes, draining water, salvaging what they could. Milo handed them towels while laughing hysterically every time Owen slipped. When the crisis was over, they collapsed onto a bench in the garden, wet, muddy, and exhausted. Lila had a smear of grease on her cheek. Owen reached out and gently wiped it off with his thumb, pausing for a moment too long. Their eyes locked. You're incredible, he said, voice barely above a whisper. So are you, she replied. He hesitated, then leaned in. Their lips met, soft and hesitant at first, then deepened with all the emotion they had been holding back for weeks. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was real, like everything they'd built together. When they finally pulled apart, Milo appeared with impeccable timing. You, he said, grinning. You kissed the spaghetti lady. They burst out laughing, their foreheads still pressed together. From that moment on, something had shifted, and neither of them wanted it to shift back. Not everything could be solved with kindness and community. One afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up outside the Haven. A tall, suited man stepped out, Lila's father, or rather, the man who had once adopted her for appearance's sake, then discarded her just as quickly. I heard you've gone soft, he said coldly, looking around the place with disdain. Throwing away your career for this, Shanty town. I didn't throw anything away, Lila replied calmly. I finally found something worth building, he sneered. You could still fix this. Come back, sell the property. I'll make it happen. Owen stepped beside her, arms crossed, jaw set. She doesn't need your offers. Lila glanced at Owen, his presence, his steadiness, and turned back to the man. I'm not for sale, not anymore. The man left in a rage, and though Lila's hands trembled for hours afterward, she felt stronger than ever. For the first time in her life she had chosen herself, her heart, her future, and that future included Owen and Milo. Winter came back to Dunslow with its usual fury, sharp winds, frozen streets, and whispers of snow. But this time things were different. The Haven had heating, blankets, and a pantry stocked full thanks to community donations. Children played in the common room. Seniors sipped hot cocoa and shared stories. Families who had once huddled in cars now had clean beds and safe shelter. And one night, as snow began to fall softly outside, Lila, Owen, and Milo sat together near the fireplace. Milo curled into Lila's lap, already half asleep. Remember last winter? Owen said quietly. You were on that bench. I almost didn't stop. I'm glad you did, Lila replied. You saved me. Owen looked at her, eyes shining. You saved me right back. They kissed again. This time with the quiet confidence of people who had already chosen each other. Outside the wind howled. Inside the warmth remained. Months passed, and the Haven grew from a humble shelter into a thriving community center. Owen taught woodworking classes for teenagers who needed direction. Lila launched job training workshops and partnered with local businesses for employment opportunities. Milo started first grade, and every day he'd come home with drawings of his new friends, and always a figure labeled Lila with a big heart around her. Word of the project spread across the region. City council members came for tours. Journalists featured the Haven in their good news segments. But none of that mattered as much to Owen and Lila as the everyday moments. The meals shared, the laughter in the halls, the quiet dignity restored to people who had once felt invisible. One evening, after a long day, Lila stood on the rooftop garden Owen had built. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting gold across the city skyline. Owen joined her, wiping his hands on his jeans. Funny, isn't it? She said, gazing out. This was supposed to be the end of something for me. He smiled. Turns out it was the beginning. She looked up at him, eyes full. I don't think I've ever loved anything this much. He took her hand. Not even spaghetti, she laughed. Not even spaghetti. On the anniversary of the Haven's grand opening, the community threw a celebration. Balloons lined the halls, tables overflowed with homemade food, and a makeshift stage hosted kids performing songs and skits. Lila was everywhere, greeting people, hugging elders, adjusting Milo's bow tie as he led a group of kids in a chaotic rendition of You've Got a Friend in Me. Owen watched her, heart full to bursting. When the crowd quieted, he stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. Most of you know me, he began. And if you don't, well, I'm the guy who once gave his only blanket to a stranger on a park bench. The audience laughed softly. That stranger turned out to be the woman who helped change my life, and yours. She turned an empty building into a home. She turned my son's tears into laughter. And she turned my heart back on when I thought it was frozen forever. Lila stared at him, mouth open, eyes glistening. Owen turned toward her, then knelt. Milo and I already know we love you. Will you make it official? Will you marry me? The room fell silent. Then Milo shouted, Say yes, Lila. She ran forward, pulled Owen into her arms, and whispered through tears, Yes, 1,000,000 times yes. The wedding was simple, held at the Haven, surrounded by those they had served and those who had helped them serve. Lila wore a cream dress stitched by one of the residents. Owen wore a navy jacket borrowed from a friend. Milo stood proudly between them, holding the rings. There were no chandeliers, no expensive caterers, no string quartets, just love, warmth, and a chorus of cheers as they said, I do. Afterward they danced barefoot in the courtyard. Volunteers passed around cupcakes. Someone played an old guitar. And as the sun dipped behind the warehouse, now painted in bright colors and covered in ivy, Owen pulled Lila close. This is what I dreamed of, he whispered. Not money, not fame, just this, a home, a family. Lila leaned her head on his shoulder. We've got all three now. Milo tugged at their hands. Can we go play tag? They laughed and ran after him. 3 silhouettes bathed in golden light. In the end, the blanket Owen gave away had done far more than provide warmth. It had sewn 2 broken lives together, stitch by stitch, thread by thread, into something whole and beautiful. A haven, a home, a love story that began with kindness and never ended. If this story warmed your heart, don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe for more inspiring stories of love, second chances, and everyday miracles. Because sometimes the smallest act, like offering a blanket, can change a life forever.